He began practicing Ashtanga yoga and stopped teaching yoga for a couple of years to focus on learning a system of yoga that was completely new to him and by which he was captivated. Then Eddie also started studying Sanskrit and began learning how to chant Sanskrit texts and prayers in a traditional manner. Around 1995, he opened his first yoga school in Soho in New York and ran that school in various locations until 2019. When the pandemic started in March of 2020, he transitioned to an online program and has decided to continue to focus his energy and be present as a teacher in this largely live online format. And today he's going to be talking about his wonderful book, which I've read, and it's an amazing book. Thank you for writing that book, Eddie, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for another session of Yoga Insights. Namaste, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back with you. I see we have a little bit of an old bio. When I wrote that, I was simply teaching online, but since then we've fortunately been able to reopen our old Broome Street Ganesha temple in the same location we used to have. So now I'm teaching online, but I'm also teaching in person and taking care of the temple where I'm sitting now. So it's amazing to be back in here and pleasure to be speaking with you again.
Thank you so much. And the temple looks beautiful. And I'll leave you to the session now and see you guys later, everyone, for the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. Okay, folks, I will share my screen with you. As Sophia said, my name is Eddie. I'm a yoga teacher from New York City. I've been teaching for, I guess, about 34 years now, or 33 years, something like that. Throughout my yoga journey, I have learned a bunch of different things, several different types of yoga methodologies. I have studied Sanskrit and continue to do so. I'm currently taking a Master's of Science program through the Vivekananda Yoga University. The professors are all from S. Vyasa in Bangalore. I'm really enjoying this program and learning a lot. And a few years ago, in around 2017, I started, it was 2017 or 2018, I started writing a book, which was called One Simple Thing. It was published in 2019, and it was based on about 4 years of lectures I'd been giving on yoga and the nervous system. The book was I had published several books before. This was the first one I had done completely just on my own. And it was a really enjoyable process to write it. The book was read far and wide by a very diverse audience, and I was happy to see the feedback that the book got. And particularly, it was read by many dogs and many cats. I think that most of that knowledge they already had in them anyway, but it was, of course, gratifying to see my readership growing. The book basically investigates a few questions that I was asking myself at the time. I had been engaged in scientific research on yoga for a little while with a gentleman named Dr. Marshall Higgins, and we had been looking at the pre-hypertensive conditions in African Americans and if yoga was going to affect their cardiovascular health. We looked at the education levels of high school students and a bunch of other things. It was really about 12 years ago, and it was my first foray into the science world after really focusing on yoga and quote unquote spirituality and chanting and all those things for a few decades. And one of the things that was interesting was that with the hypertension study and with the grade point average study we did on high school students, the protocols were not all that different. There were a few little basic different things, but for the most part, they were basically the same, yet the outcomes of our studies were positive. And so I wondered to myself, how is it possible that yoga, the same yoga, can help someone who has hypertension, can help someone with their attention on task, time on task so they can improve their grades, can help someone with stress or sleep or anxiety or perhaps certain body pains or energy levels. But by doing the same basic things, there's a wide range of effects that occur. And though I didn't know a lot about science at the time, I was suspecting that it had something to do with the nervous system, and that the nervous system, which is a massive interconnected highway of information and communication flows, basically knew what needed to be fixed and could fix it when we gave it the space to do so. So by creating the conditions for healing to happen, healing could occur. But if we don't create the conditions for healing to happen, then healing will not occur. So if we don't sleep enough, if we eat terrible food, if we expose ourselves to endless amounts of stress, even stress which isn't so stressful, but we perceive it as stressful, if we think negatively all the time, if we doubt ourselves, et cetera, we're not creating conditions for healing, we're creating conditions for more inflammation. So yoga, it seems, is creating these conditions, and one of the ways that I was making a supposition that it did so was by calming down the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is that branch of our autonomic nervous system which is going to drive activity, help us to avoid danger, release stress hormones when we need them. And when it is stimulated too much and too constantly, then it creates these constant low levels of stress or anxiety or stress hormones being released. We have excess inflammation, we have disturbed sleep, we have body pain, we have trouble focusing, and most importantly, we have trouble connecting with purpose and also with planning out our day, planning out our lives. One of the interesting things about the sympathetic nervous system is it's very location non-specific, meaning that when adrenaline and cortisol is released into our bloodstream, which are some of the stress hormones that we need for everyday activities, when too much of them are being released, they kind of go all over. This is not going to be a very scientific talk, so it's going to go to a lot of the end organs. It's going to go to a lot of different places in the body, including the brain. And so we'll have a systematic or systemic experience of stress and inflammation all through our body. It's not very targeted. And so when we begin to downregulate the sympathetic nervous system through yoga practices, then we have the systemic downregulation where calm and healing and repair can then occur in many different places at the same time too. So the question I was asking myself was, because these effects of the nervous system are so wide-ranging and we experience them in the body, is the happiness that we seek, and of course yoga says that, and Sankhya and other Hindu and Indic traditions say that seeking happiness is a fundamental part of being a human being. Happiness not in terms of seeking pleasures, which are always going to be short-lived, but in seeking the deeper purpose of our life, which leads to fulfillment. That's true happiness. So is this a physiological experience, or is it purely a mental one? Where do the mind and our physiology meet? And really what I wanted to know was that, how was it that the yogis chose particular practices that were targeting very discrete parts of our nervous system to make change that was going to eventually lead to either peace or joy or bliss or self-knowledge or perhaps even enlightenment? So these were some of the questions that I was asking, and I was also wondering, is there are particular areas of our brain or of our physiology where the obstructions to know who we are contained? I talked about this a lot in the last lecture I did with Indica Yoga. So in this lecture, I'll be looking at some different things also based on my book. So here we go. In the foreword of the book, Dr. Chopra noted that the underlying vision of yoga is union, which means overcoming our divided self. Our divided self is a fragmented self. It is the opposite of union. It is where we are not in touch with who we are, what we want to be, We are not in touch with listening on a deep level to ourselves and what our needs are. And I know this happened to me on a very deep level early on in my yogic journey, where I had signals that I was picking up from the people around me that I decided to ignore because I thought what I was doing was going to lead me towards something good anyway. Ignoring those signals was, in retrospect, probably not the best listening exercise that I could have done. However, by ignoring the things that I knew I should be listening to, I learned a lot about myself, and I also learned a lot about what I don't want to be and what I don't want to become in my life. So that was actually a pretty good but pretty painful lesson. Now, Dr. Chopra went on to say that you can approach the idea of wholeness from many angles. A kidney, a heart, or a lung cell is already unified in its natural state. And not only does it carry out its operations, but it has all the genetic programming to know what every other cell in the entire body is doing. I'm sorry, that's our doorbell is ringing right now. Someone has forgotten that it's a full moon, and so they came to class anyway. Hopefully they won't get too annoyed and they'll forgive me and just go for some coffee. So a cell does not doubt its existence, but quite often we as human beings, we do doubt our existence. We question ourselves and we wonder. Perhaps that's one of the things that distinguishes us from a single cell, that we are a conglomeration of cells operating in a harmony together, and therefore there is some overarching purpose to this whole collection of cells, which we call a human body or an organism. So if separation is our fragmented state, what is our whole state? How can we live in such a way that we are almost like a cell that knows what it's supposed to do and just does it freely in support of all the things around us? How do we live in harmony with the environment that we live in, the environment of our body, of our mind, our emotions, and everything that's ever happened to us? So then some more questions arose, of course. In order to move away from a fragmented state, which is always caused by suffering and by having challenges to deal with, but sometimes I don't have the capacity to deal with, and how do I deal with these challenges so that I don't get too thrown off? Can I form a very close and intimate, almost friendship-like relationship with my mind and my body and my nervous system? And then in doing so, can I begin to answer the fundamental questions of life which we see in all of the different religious and philosophical and contemplative traditions? Who am I? Yesterday there was a wonderful meditation and talk on Indica Yoga about who am I from the perspective of Ramana Maharshi, who was a great sage who lived in India, died around 1950 or 1959, highly influential in bringing forward this idea of questioning, the idea of questioning who am I, into very much the popular consciousness of both Indian and Western seekers. So who am I? What am I doing here? And what do I do next? And this is very much the second two questions, what am I doing here and what do I do next? These are very much, what is my purpose? If I know who I am, then automatically I know my purpose. And if I know my purpose, then I know what I'm doing here on this planet. And then if I know what I'm doing here, then it's just a simple matter of figuring out how to live in alignment with that, how to kind of obey the purpose-driven nature that I've experienced and now realize and act accordingly. And that's a challenge because sometimes we know what we should be doing, but we don't have the strength to do it because we're lazy or we want to do something else or we're not completely convinced or we haven't been listening closely. And one other thing I'd like to say about purpose is that our purpose can change and it should change through the different stages of our life. When we're young and we're seeking and we're experimenting with things that we want to become, part of our purpose there should be learning, educating ourselves, experimenting, experiencing new things, seeking things, and really investigating. And then the next stage of our life where we begin to pass through that initial experimentation form and we settle in on something that we think, okay, this is where I'm going to focus, then we need to begin to kind of funnel that energy and funnel that attention in one direction. Now, even in funneling it in one direction, and in moving into an alignment, what we see is the thing that we want to be doing. There's still going to be creativity. There's still going to be experimentation. There's still going to be new things. It's just that you're kind of focusing yourself more in alignment with what you feel you should really be doing. Okay, for example, when I was a teenager, I didn't know if I wanted to be an artist, if I wanted to be a musician, if I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I did all those things and really threw myself into them as though it was the only thing that I wanted to do. But then somehow I found yoga, started practicing yoga, and I realized that that was the thing for me. So I kind of said, okay, I'm not going to be a musician. I'm not going to be an artist. I'm going to give myself to this, and I'm going to see what happens. And back then, yoga was not a consumer undertaking. There was no yoga industry. It wasn't a life path. There weren't a million teacher trainings everywhere. It was really, you only did yoga if you were on a spiritual quest. And that's what I felt like I was on. So at that point, I began to funnel my attention towards this particular thing that I was going to focus on. But even from that time period until now, I've learned different yogas. I've learned different types of ritual. And now my orientation of yoga is still creative. And I'm still absolutely as enthusiastic and interested in learning new things about yoga as I was when I was 20 years old. So, how do you live in alignment with your purpose? You listen. And a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, we're going to assume yoga and meditation are the same things because they are, is really about learning how to listen. Learning how to listen to your body, first of all, through asanas, learning how to listen to your emotions through interoception, and then eventually learning how to listen to your mind when you figure out what and where it is. Now, a lot of the reason I got into the nervous system is because it is this messaging system. It's communicating body-wide all the time. And if the messages that the nervous system is sending from the brain to the body and from the body to the brain, if those messages are clear and unimpeded and flowing freely, then a lot of different alignments become easier. Not just physical, like postures, but nervous system alignments, emotional, mental, intuitive, all these things start to open and flow. And this is essentially what asanas and pranayamas are for. So before I go into the talks about asanas and pranayamas, I just want to talk about Mrs. Jane Benditson for a moment. She was, sadly, I don't have a photo of her. She was my English teacher in 10th and 11th grade, and maybe 9th grade too, I think. And Mrs. Benditson had us read Siddhartha as the first book that we read in our 9th grade class, or 10th grade, I can't remember which it was. And that book was an eye-opening book for me. In this fairly rigid school system that I was in, there was no discussion of spirituality. There was no discussion of a higher self. There was no discussion of the life quest that we all go on. And Mrs. Benditson said to us that the most important questions we could ask ourselves and that we had to ask ourselves all through our lives were, who am I? What am I doing here? And what do I do next? The 3 questions I just read out. These I learned when I was 15. And they've honestly been guiding questions for my entire life, up to this point. Who am I? What am I doing here? And what do I do next? And you can ask these questions of yourself at any point during the day, at any point during your life, when you're not too sure where you want to be moving. And so when she first told us about these questions, and I was a young quasi-punk rocker, I thought to myself, this is exactly what I need to hear, that who am I in this moment is my identity as a punk rocker, and or as a musician. And what am I doing here? I want to express myself through my music and through this lifestyle. And what do I do next was, well, I'm going to write some songs, I'm going to play the best that I can. And so even though the identity shifts occurred a lot along the way, and they continue to, I can latch on to an assumed identity, know that it's not forever, but live out that identity the best I can during the time that I'm playing that role. Because honestly, we're all playing roles in our lives. Right now, I play the role of a husband, and I try to do that the best I can. I play the role of a father. I try to do that the best I can. I play the role of a son. I don't do a terribly good job at that, truth be told. I try to play the role of a yoga teacher the best I can, of a yoga student, of a devotee, of so many things. We have so many roles that we play. Everyone in the world does. And so what do? We should know that these roles are only assumed identities for the time that we're playing them, but play them the best that we can, because the way that we play our roles is going to affect other people, and it's going to affect us as well. So be authentic in your assumed identity until perhaps one day you transcend having any identity at all. Maybe that will happen. As Deepak Chopra once said, the best story is having no story at all. But until we have no story and we transcend all of the stories, let's try to craft the best stories about ourselves that we can, and then act in accordance with those best stories. So Mrs. Benditson had us ask these questions. It made me think about purpose and identity. And she also had us write about the unexamined life. What happens to you when you don't examine your life? You become an automaton. You become sucked into the status quo. You become trapped by what society thinks that you should do all the time because it serves society, but not even the best parts of society, just the parts of society that want to benefit off of your participation, not one that wants to grow, be inclusive, be kind, be healing, be loving, end gun violence, end racism, etc., etc. We have to examine ourselves constantly. The unexamined life means that our entire life we need to be examining, we need to be questioning, we need to be paying attention, and we need to be listening. And it sounds like it could be a chore, but listening is never a chore when you're listening for things that are enjoyable and pleasant. And when you hear things that are not pleasant, then you know how to respond to them because you've tuned the listening part. You can say, okay, I recognize that for what it is. So, clear messages. That's going to come from a clear nervous system, a healthy body, and a light and buoyant mind. Clear listening is going to come when our sense organs are free and open, and we've been paying attention to them and not just using them for indulgence, or using them to suck in information, or using them to control other people. But when we recognize the sense organs for their purpose, to perceive information coming in from around the world, that we're then interpreting, then we can listen clearly, we can understand our interpretations, and act in accordance with the messages that we're receiving. So, back to the book. The book has 11 chapters in it, and the first 5 chapters are very briefly what I'll talk about today. I talked about the last chapters in the last talk, so I kind of went back to front, and now I'm going front to back. Everything that I talked about up until this point is basically the thing that was stimulating this journey for me in the first place, and stimulating the writing of the book. Okay, so first, what is yoga? Big question, of course. There are a lot of different definitions of yoga. I have chosen to take one perspective on yoga because I think that it encompasses all of the other types of yogas that we hear about. And now, of course, not everybody agrees with me on this. A few people do, a bunch of people don't. I think that Patanjali's definition of yoga, that yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, is a constant in any of the different practices. So nirodha means the mastery, the stilling, or the stopping of the vrittis, the modifications, the interpretations, the memories, the experiences in the chitta, the field of awareness, the field of consciousness, where the mind arises from. So the ability to master what is happening in the field of mind or in the field of awareness is necessary if you are practicing bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga, tantra yoga, if you are involved in learning and practicing Kashmiri Shaivism, or if you are practicing Ramana Maharshi's Atma Vichara, whatever you might be doing, you have to be using your mind. And when you're using your mind, you're going to need to, filter out things that are peripheral distractions that are not supporting you. So this nirodha is going to occur in any of the different practices that we could do. So what is yoga for me, and of course for Patanjali, and for the overarching idea of yoga? It's going to be this type of mastery, control, elimination of the content in your field of consciousness. That mastery might be also the heightening of one particular thought so that you merge into it. Like if you are worshiping Lord Vishnu, you might want to be able to master the content of your mind so that you can hold Lord Vishnu's form in it, so that your awareness merges within that form and not with anything else. So that's a type of nirodha as well. Yoga further, according to Patanjali, is anupaya. Anupaya is a remedy, or it's a path that we walk on, it's an approach. And within Patanjali's yoga, it's a removing of the identifications and the memories that we have about ideas and objects that we identify with, that create an assumed identity that are other than our inner awareness. So the removal of all peripheral and all incoming ideas and objects and sounds and visions and sights and potentials, everything that is other than our inner awareness, then becomes understood as other than, and our inner awareness is allowed to become the primary thing that is in the field of our consciousness. And so then whatever practice we might be doing, whether we're doing pranayama, doing a headstand, or we're doing mantra japa, or we're doing formless meditation, the underlying characteristic will be this tad pradeshedartam yekatatva abhyasaha. That means that we engage in the practice of one thing. We engage in the practice of one thing. Now, from a superficial level, we might take this to be just do one practice for the rest of your life and don't do anything else. That can work for some people. It doesn't work for everyone. And even with some people who are mainly doing one practice, say a mantra japa, they also have some peripheral practices that they do around that to support that practice, study or service or what have you. According to Vyasa in the commentaries on the Sutra of Patanjali, the Yekatattva, the one thing that we're practicing underneath everything, is holding steady awareness. So keeping our awareness as the focus or fulcrum or underlying basis of all other practices is the practicing of one tattva. The practice of keeping our awareness present no matter what else we're doing. And so to be able to have this type of awareness is going back to and reflective of nirodha, this mastery of what's happening in the field of our mind. So yoga is nirodha. Yoga is anupaya, a remedy for all of the peripheral identities that we might get lost in, that don't support us moving towards our purpose. And then underneath the nirodha and the upaya is going to be this constant practice of awareness, and that's going to be our guiding force. So one thing, one reason I think why I like this definition of yoga as chittavritti nirodha, which can be applied to, as far as I'm concerned, basically any yoga practice that we see prevalent in the world today, is that we have so many things that divide us already: politics, religion, sports teams, our opinions, our ideas. Even yoga has been dividing us, and that's not a new thing. Philosophies have divided people in India for a long time. That's how debates arose. But the debates were originally to serve the refinement of knowledge. But as time has gone by and as our minds have become less subtle, we begin to form divisions even between yoga styles or methods or gurus. And I experience this on a regular basis now, hearing people being dismissive of other types of yoga practices, dismissive of other yoga teachers, and I've as well done that myself in the past too. And now I try not to do it. But when I was very deeply in the Ashtanga yoga world, we were highly critical of not only Iyengar yoga and Bikram yoga and all the other yogas. It was almost like we were encouraged to be dismissive of that. And not only that, we were encouraged to be dismissive of anything that wasn't asanas. Pranayama, not necessary, only for advanced people. Meditation, oh, that's just mad attention. There's no way you can meditate. You can't even do this asana correctly. All these types of things were occurring. And maybe that's softening now a little bit. I'm not too sure. But when I was deeply in it, that was a big part of it. And what that did was that closed us down. It didn't make us inclusive. It didn't make us even friendly. It just made us kind of arrogant. Or I'll just speak for myself, me. And so really, that's not why any of us got into yoga. We got into yoga because we were seeking to know who we are. We were interested in generating larger amounts of love and kindness and compassion and empathy within us. And this is really one of the things that when we are doing our practices properly and we're not engaging in backbiting or criticism, that we start to feel these things and they become prevalent in us. And I think this is why yoga has touched so many people in so many countries around the globe, regardless of the type of practice it is. There's something inherent in yoga which is transcendent and connecting. And I think that's the part that we want to be focusing on, and the thing that I was really looking at within the book. Hariharananda, who is my favorite commentator on Yoga Sutra, had a very nice way of describing the goal of yoga, which is not really samadhi, but is kaivalya. So I retract that statement about the goal of yoga, but one of the primary practices within yoga is this practice of samadhi, which is a release of all content of the mind that we might be identifying with, except for that one thing that we are meditating upon, and we merge with it. And so what he says is that our mental weakness is only our inability to retain our good intentions. It's hard to keep our good intentions fixed in the mind all the time. But as our mind becomes steady and firm, it's not shaking all the time, we gain a mental power that allows us to have our intentions, the good ones, ever more present. So as our calmness increases, as this mental power increases, then we get to the acme of samadhi, which is the ultimate calmness. So I think this is a very beautiful statement. I like to remember this as much as I can when I'm doing whatever practices I am. Calmness is very important for the mental power to increase. The 8 limbs of yoga are something that we have all heard about, samadhi being the 8th limb, a jumping off point for kaivalya, and there are 8 or 9 different types of samadhi depending on who you speak to. One of the meanings of yoga is relation, and I chose to focus on this particular word rather than union, because sometimes union is a little bit far off in the future for us. We love the idea of union, but we're not really feeling it all the time. It's not part of our waking reality. Fragmentation is often more part of our waking reality. So for practical uses, because I'm a fairly practical person on occasion, except for when I decide to build temples in downtown Manhattan, I chose to look at this idea of relation as one of the important meanings of yoga. So in regards to yama and niyama, we can have yama as that I consciously choose to make my interpersonal interactions thoughtful, loving, and respectful. This is now, how am I relating to my interpersonal interactions? In niyama, how am I relating purposefully to my spiritual practices and disciplines? What kind of a relationship do I have with them? Is it a positive relationship? Is it a relationship which is based on feeling a compulsion, an obligation, that if I don't do them, I'm a bad person or I'm not as good as a practitioner next to me? What kind of relationship do I have with my disciplines? Are they leading me towards more expansive frames of mind, or am I becoming more rigid? These are all good questions to ask. Asanas, how do I consciously relate to my body and mind through the postures that I'm doing? What kind of a relationship am I forming with my body? Pranayama, what kind of a relationship am I forming with my nervous system and how I choose to regulate it? And then with pratyahara, how do I consciously relate to the power of seeing behind my sense organs, the power of perceiving, of perception below my sense organs? Am I aware of how I interpret incoming information and sometimes distort it in ways that is antagonistic to the world or to my highest good or the highest good of other people? Dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, how do I consciously choose to relate to my ability to pay attention and focus, to expand my awareness, and finally, to perceive unity consciousness, which might be fleeting? How can I form that relationship with unity consciousness in my life? So all of the yamas and niyamas therefore become ideas of relationships, questions that we ask ourselves, and not simply things that we're trying to adhere to, things that we're trying to do. If we're trying to do things all the time, we have this idea of doership. And little by little, we're trying to kind of release the idea of doership because we're not doing the universe. The universe is kind of doing us. So the practice of postures, I'll go through this quickly. We have about 7 minutes left. Most Westerners, I'm putting myself in this category because I'm a Westerner, we do yoga for 3 basic reasons these days. To keep our body fit, for heightened states of relaxation, and to reduce stress. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you primarily only heard about yoga as spiritual undertaking for enlightenment. That conversation has diminished a little bit, not completely, definitely not in India, but in America it's diminished quite a bit. That's obvious from all the salesmanship happening around yoga. In Europe, it feels a little bit more intact. In Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Swatmarama says that asanas, as the first of the practices of the limbs, give steadiness of limb, freedom from disease, steadiness of the mind, freedom from disease, and lightness of limb. And so this is basically, a good enough reason to think that a fit and flexible body, relaxation, and reduction of stress are all going to fulfill what Swatmarama said. So, and we'll focus in just for a moment on freedom from disease. These are basically the non-communicable diseases that are arising from too much stress, including anxiety, some types of diabetes, some types of cancers, digestive disorders, sleep disruptions. All of these are leading to terrible states of ill health. 95% of the diseases in the world, and many of them are avoidable or reversible with the practice of yoga. Not all, but many. So within our lives, we are either in balance or out of balance. Balance is usually not a fixed state. It's usually something that we come in and out of, and you can feel it when it lasts, and you feel it when it goes away. Nature itself is either in an equilibrium, and there's no manifestation, or it's out of equilibrium, and the world is created. This is according to Sankhya. This is going to be associated with the 3 qualities, the 3 gunas that many of you have heard about, sattva, rajas, and tamas. I won't go into those in depth this time, but when things are out of balance, that means that sattva, rajas, and tamas are moving, interacting with each other. And one of them is usually going to be more predominant. We can use this movement of sattva, rajas, and tamas as well to begin to bring ourselves back into an equilibrium too. So within the mind, sattva is our cognition or our knowing. So when we strengthen the mental power, we are strengthening sattva. And rajas in the mind is the effort that we make to understand or direct our awareness. So through positive and purposeful direction of our attention, we are strengthening the ability of the mind to move where it wants to. And thus, rajas becomes balanced as well. And through tamas, retention, our memory gets strengthened. And memory is one of the most important parts of yoga practices, because if you want to sit and meditate and keep your awareness resting on one object, it's said that when your attention or awareness moves away from that object, it's not because your mind is wandering, it's because you've forgotten where you want your mind to be. But if you remember where you want your mind to be, it will always rest there. So we can use sattva, rajas, and tamas in the mind in particular ways through all of the different yoga practices to strengthen and bring equilibrium to these gunas, and thus become more aligned with where we want our mind to be. With asanas, it's important to have a little bit of variation. It's not good to do the same thing all the time. We do things all the time, the same, physically, it can actually lead to some structural instability. So a little bit of variation is very good when it comes to physical movement. When it comes to food as well, the seasons change, variation is part of nature. And it's good for us to move along with that variation. So we'll wrap up here with the question, where is my mind? Chapter 5. An apt question, perhaps more than that, would be, what is my mind? Is it a substance? Is it material? Is it invisible? Is it my feelings, my emotions, my thoughts, my memories? Is it my instincts? Is it the incoming information flows? What is it? According to the various traditions, it's all of these things. It is going to be whatever is in it at that time will be our mind. Dr. Daniel Siegel has a nice explanation of mind as sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And that's not far away from the inner instruments that we hear about spoken of in Vedanta. But one of the ways that I like to look at the mind is that the mind is a neutral field. That means it's just a field of potential. It's a field of possibility. And whatever we put into the mind will grow. So if we put anger, anxiety, hatred, jealousy, laziness into the mind, that's going to grow and be magnified. And if we constantly are putting goodness and kindness and calmness, quietness, thoughtfulness, service, love, understanding, listening, compassion, empathy, discipline into the mind, dedication, devotion, then those things are going to grow in the field of the mind as well. So we can also look at yoga as a purposeful planting of what we want to have grow in our mind. So that becomes our waking experience. Along the way, there are going to be different types of goals and ideas and things that come our way. And the peripheral goals, if we get lost in them, fame, money, power, recognition, material possessions, all those things to a certain degree are fine, but not if they become our overarching goal. If we get lost in those, we will deviate from listening to our path and listening to our purpose. Yesterday I read a nice thing on the Hindu website. It's a website I really liked. It said, your primary goal should be liberation. If you are intent upon it and serious about it, a solution will happen on its own. So that means be intent on our primary purpose, whatever that might be for you. Don't worry too much about having all the things you need to get there. If you are thinking about it, intent upon it, if you're really listening to it as the primary thrust of your life, then the solutions and the things that we need to support us will come when the time is right. Okay, So that concludes my short little sharing of my thoughts on yoga. And I will now invite Sophia to come back up and open it up for any questions if there are any.
Namaste. Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. And, you know, in the middle of the presentation, when you were talking about everything having a calming effect, I just want to share that every time I talk to you, whether it's for an interview or whether it's a session, I always feel that calming energy by the end of the session. So thank you so much. And it's working. So, yeah, I just really wanted to share that. And we do have a few questions. Our first question is from Swami Taponidhi ji. Swami ji, thank you for joining us. He is saying, how do you cultivate inner strength?
How do you cultivate inner strength? I see a question that says the neural pathways are clear, and yet there is confusion and conflict while facing events of life. How do you resolve this to align with the purpose?
He asked two questions. First was, how do you cultivate inner strength? And this was the second question.
Okay, so how do you cultivate personal strength? I'm sure Swamiji has a much better answer to this than I do. But I think that there are a number of pathways laid out by Patanjali and laid out as well as in the Upanishads and in Gita and all of the texts about how to cultivate that inner strength. And I think a lot of it is based on adhikara. And if, for example, you are drawn towards a devotional practice and you want to be worshiping Ganesha or Shiva or Krishna, then your inner strength is going to be derived from your faith that you have in your Ishtadevata. In fact, Patanjali says that the pinnacle of the samadhi is from the Ishvara Pranidhana. Surrender to the Lord is how we attain to the pinnacle of samadhi. So that's definitely an inner strength right there. And then earlier on in Yoga Sutra, Patanjali says that we can move towards the first levels of samadhi. Of course, the samadhi is an inner strength. Through Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaka iteration. So this is Shraddha through deep conviction that our practices are leading us in the right direction and having faith in them. And then that Shraddha, that conviction, leads to Virya, which is vitality and energy, which of course again is an inner strength. And Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, and that great inner vitality and energy leads to the strengthening of memory, of Smriti, remembering who am I, what am I doing here, what is my purpose, what should I be doing? And then that leads to samadhi, the absorption, and then that samadhi leads to prajna, to wisdom and to insight. And that wisdom and insight then serves to strengthen our shraddha, our conviction, so it serves as a feedback loop. That's my favorite sutra, I think, of just about the entire Yoga Sutras. I feel that that is a very encouraging sutra for me, so that when I wonder about where I should go, what I should be doing, if I'm doing the right thing, I think about where is my conviction, where is my shraddha, and then I try to always go back to that. And so that's where I gain my strength from. And if the neural pathways are clear and there's confusion and conflict, well, this was basically an analogy, and it was a thought based on the granthis. So we have the three main granthis or knots in the nervous system, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And then also within all the other nadis, there are tons of little knots as well. And my own particular understanding of the granthis, and I might be mistaken, is that, but it's based on text, of course, is that every time we identify with an action, it's tying us to doership of that action. And that being tied to doership is a type of a granthi. And so the yoga practices are basically to untie all of the knots. Anytime during the day, when there is a feeling of doership, we're creating new knots, we're creating new karmas, which are going to bind us. Certain people will untie all of the knots and have release and freedom, but other regular people like myself, we're going to be tying new knots every day. In fact, probably by answering this question, I'm tying myself into more knots and getting myself into more trouble. So what I think is that the neural pathways and also the subtle body pathways of the nadis, the prana nadis, for the most part, are not going to be completely clear for 99.999% of us, because we're always going to be creating small little confusions and making little knots that then we untie, but then we create other ones later. So I think that trying to understand and feel our purpose is one way of making sure that if I'm living in alignment with it, I'm not tying too many more new knots. Maybe I'm minimizing the amount of knots that I'm tying. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but it's just one thought that I'm having speaking to you right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was elaborate, and I thought it was a great answer. So thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is from Anjan Nandiji, who's saying that how does one dilute the recollection of memory of the past to reflect on the present situation and review it for a better result?
Well, dilute the recollections of memory of the past. So according to Patanjali, so he's generally my reference for everything because I'm a yoga person, and I feel great affection and affinity for Yoga Sutra. We are a bundle of memories. That's basically what we are. We are a bundle of memories down to a cellular level. So every cell in our body has a memory of what it should be doing, the function that it should be performing. And when it loses the memory of the function it should be performing and how it should be operating in unity with the rest of the cellular body, then problems begin to occur. So even on a cellular level, we are memory. On a mental level, on an emotional level, on a feeling level, we are also memory. And we live in response to the memories that we have. Maybe they're traumatic memories that cause us to behave in a certain way. They're happy memories that cause us to behave in a certain way. Or they're new memories based on new experiences that cause us to behave in a certain way. And all of the memories are going to be these tiny, small identities, these tiny, small asmitas. We talk about asmita as being the stories we tell about ourselves. There's one overarching asmita of I-ness, but that's made up of many, many different types of little I-nesses along the way. And we can begin to release ourselves from those tiny little I-nesses by stepping back, by being aware of them, observing them, seeing where they come from, and then they can release on their own. If we try to suppress any part of our humanness, any type of our personality, ignore it and push it down, it's going to form a violent energy within us, which is then going to spew back up at one point or another. So we have to invite all of the different parts of ourselves up to our conscious awareness so we can see them, make friends with them, observe them, see where they come from. And then they can be released, because essentially they are not us. We just think that they are. But we have to learn that they are not us by inviting them in, by looking at them, by being able to be discerning about them. And then they can release themselves. Who are we? We are awareness. We're the seer. We're the experiencer of everything which is happening around us. But then somehow we get tied up to the experience. We get tied up to the things that we're looking in. And we identify with that experience rather than with the one who is having or viewing that experience. So the resolution of past memory is, and it's not an easy thing to do because some of our memories are very, very painful. And when they come up, we experience the pain, the tears, the betrayal, the hurt, all of it so fully as though it's happening again all over. So for deeply traumatic experiences, we need some help. Sometimes we need a psychiatrist or a psychologist or someone who can guide us through that. For smaller things, we can do them on our own. simply by observing them, inviting them in, making friends with them, and then recognizing, I'm attaching myself to this identity, but it's not really me. And then we can release it. Now, there are certain things also that we might not want to release ourselves from yet, because then we'd be shirking our responsibilities. So we can't use that exercise to escape responsibility. We have to fulfill the responsibilities of either paying bills or raising our kids, or keeping the house clean, or paying attention to your spouse and bringing them flowers. Or we have to maintain our responsibilities, but we also have to not become overwhelmed by them, and not become overwhelmed by our attachment to identity, which we do have. Too much attachment to these memories and identities is going to cause stress. That's just, if you want to get over stress, then you need to let go a little bit. And what do you let go of? The compulsive need to attach to an identity that you want the world to see, that you want to have accomplished a personal, very particular thing. That causes stress. So, and we all know it. And I only talk about it because I experience it, and I do that. I work too much. I take on too many projects. I don't sleep enough. All these things, I review them and I go, okay, I have to stop saying yes to so many things, except for Indica Yoga, which everyone always has to say yes to without hesitating. I also, I talk about these things because it's a constant in my life that I want to get better at, to be more balanced, to be harmonious. And, I can only be more effective if I have energy, if I'm not too tired, if I'm not overburdened with taking on too many things. So there's always a winnowing off process that we have to go through. And sometimes we have to do the opposite. Sometimes we have to take on more because we're not doing enough. And so therefore, we don't feel that we feel lonely, we don't feel engaged, we don't feel that we belong or that we're included. So then we have to take on more. That could be the opposite side of it too. So both sides. But I know this is an extremely long answer, but there aren't really any other questions that I see coming up, so I'm just using up our time. That listening is so key. Listening to what people say to us, listening to ourselves, listening to our body, listening to the environment. Listening is key. And then when we listen well, all we have to do is act in accordance with what we're hearing, and the things that we know to be true. Then there's a lot less stress. Then our path is clear. Then the things that need to get accomplished do get accomplished. Or so I hope.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you said about Indica Yoga. We love having you and we look forward to having you as part of everything we do. Thank you so much for that. Actually, we have quite a few questions. I don't know if we'll have time for all of them, but maybe a few more. So Pranjali ji is mesmerized with the calmness and depth of understanding, Eddie ji, and she wants to know how do we get to attend all your talks and sessions in the future or attend your classes?
My website is eddiestern.com, and we can put that in the chat. My Instagram is @EddieStern, and I do bunches of stuff online, and anyone is free to attend them. I see all the questions. Oh, forgive me, I didn't realize that's where they were. Suhag Mata, what do I recommend as a minimum practice of asana? It really all depends on your energy levels. Right now I do about 45 minutes to an hour of asanas, about 5 days a week. And I do a variety of stretching and strengthening. I like to turn basically in all directions, a little bit forward, a little bit back, a little to the side, a little twisting, a little upside down. But minimum practice, absolute minimum, 5 sun salutations, maybe 6, and then sit down in Padmasana or any seated comfortable position, do Yoga Mudra, Kevala Padmasana, and you can do that in 15 minutes. And you have a huge Hindu American Foundation to run. That should be good for daily practice. You have a lot of advocates ability to do that particular day. Bhavani wanted to know, when does an Ashtanga yoga stimulate sympathetic nervous system? Why would we do this if the goal is to downregulate the sympathetic nervous system? Bhavani, this is a big topic, and the Mula Bandha also can be downregulating or engaging rather for parasympathetic through the vagal nerve afferents that are connecting with the sacral nerves. So there's communication between the sacral nerves and the vagus nerve, which can help to slow the heart. And so the Mula Bandha is not really activating or stimulating sympathetic nervous system. But one thing that is stimulating sympathetic nervous system in Ashtanga Yoga is too much focus on deep chest breathing with a very loud sound. That can be overstimulating for sympathetic nervous system. Perhaps the topic of a longer discussion later. Okay, how much increase has there been in the human population who practice and experience the benefits of yoga? Why is it that those experiences the benefits are not able to inspire enough people to follow the practice as a way of life? Rajesh, I honestly have no idea, but I've been extremely inspired by yoga from India, which is where I've learned, and I'm very inspired by the tremendous growth in the amount of people who are practicing. I find that very encouraging. And I think that 30 years ago, there were not even that many yoga teachers that I would find in India or New York City. And now there are many, 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 many more. And I think that's great. So Vishaka said, you mentioned about the benefits of having Shraddha on one system or Ishtadevata. How does one identify which is the right path for us? Is it okay to be practicing a few elements, each from different yoga systems? So basically, I did Shivananda yoga for about 4 years, and then I started learning Ashtanga yoga, which I did for 30 years. And now I've gone back to earlier Hatha yoga practices that I used to do, and also I've been experimenting practices from different ancient texts that I've been studying. So my practice is very different now, and I've allowed it to change, of course, over time as the needs of my body and mind have changed. As well, I have a japa practice and a puja practice, which I've learned from other teachers outside of Ashtanga Yoga. And I study chanting with Shantala Sri Ramaya, and I also study Sanskrit with Sampadananda Mishra. So I have and then I'm doing a master's course with Vivekananda Yoga University. So I have some different things that I do that all serve the parts of me that I feel I need to nourish. And for a long time, I only did one particular thing, which was Ashtanga Yoga, but that wasn't nourishing me on all the levels of my being. It was only giving me a body which had a lot of facility and an ability to concentrate. And it didn't even teach me discipline. I already had discipline because I wanted to be doing it. But it wasn't nourishing on different levels. So I think it's good to do a variety of different practices. And this is something that Swami Shivananda spoke about as his integral yoga, and also Sri Aurobindo and many other teachers, that we should do a little bit of Raja Yoga, a little bit of Karma, a little bit of Bhakti. We should do all of them. Raja, Karma, Bhakti, and Jnana Yoga. Each of those. And then we're addressing all the levels of our being. One of them might be where we focus our main thrust of our spiritual practices, but the others should be included as well. So when you say different yoga systems, I'm not saying, oh, do a little Iyengar, do a little Ashtanga, do a little Shivananda, do a little bit of hot yoga, do a little bit of goat yoga. I'm not saying that. We have to make sure that the asana portion and pranayama portion is sound, is structured, and is intelligent. But when we say different yoga systems, I'm talking about, Bhakti, Karma, Jnana, etc., and Raja. And Rajesh, if you want to know if practicing and experiencing yoga makes us happier and healthier and better human beings, my answer is I really, truly hope so. And for the most part, I think it does. Okay, so Meg wanted to know if I had to pick 2 to 3 books that contributed most to my education related to yoga, would you consider doing that now? And if yes, which might they be? So I would say that The End of Sorrow by Eknath Easwaran, a commentary on Yoga Sutra, on Bhagavad Gita, was extremely helpful for me when I first started on the yoga path. I still think that's a very beautiful book. The Swami Hariharananda commentary on Yoga Sutra is my staple. I keep that on my desk all the time, and I'm always referring to it. And then I think and I know this is a little bit ridiculous to say, but in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is an extremely full shelf set of books, there's more yoga teaching in there than probably any other selection of books I've read. And during the pandemic, I committed myself to reading 60 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam a day for an entire year, and I read through all 13 cantos, and it was very, very good. I learned a lot, and so I think as a sadhana, I highly recommend that. I use the publication from Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada. They have all the books there. It's quite an undertaking. You need a bookshelf to put them on. But that was very, very impactful for me. So I'd say right now, those would be the 2 to 3 books I would choose. Raghavan, how do we align our nervous system with our thoughts? Thoughts and nervous system already are very much moving together at the same time, because our nervous system basically is the precursor to our thoughts, and our thoughts will influence what's happening with the nervous system. So if I have a thought of love, my nervous system is going to release certain chemicals, certain substances into my bloodstream. If I have a thought of anger or retribution, my brain is going to tell my pituitary gland to signal to the adrenals to release other substances, adrenaline and cortisol, etc. And so our thoughts are going to stimulate nervous system response, which is the release of chemicals and of electrical messaging with the nervous system and endocrine system. And the opposite is true as well, that things that are happening in the body that the nervous system is picking up and sending messages to the brain are going to create specific types of thoughts in the field of our mind. So if we're doing very healthy, positive, calming, strengthening, balancing things through our body, through asanas and pranayama, what we're doing, and I'll give one example. Say we do Kapalabhati or Agnisara in the morning time, and we do very rhythmic pumpings of the abdomen with particular breathing or non-breathing pattern. That's sending a particular signal to the nerves in the abdomen that connect to the vagal nerves as well, that are going up to the brain, telling the brain the condition of the body. If we do very slow, rhythmic abdominal breathing, we are sending messages through and the nervous system in the gut has the same amount of nerves as the nervous system running through our spinal column. It sends messages of rhythmicity, of evenness, of safety, of calm up to the brain through those nerves as well. So specific breathing patterns are going to create specific thought responses to the state of our body. So the way to get our nervous system in alignment with our thoughts is simply to do practices in a very thoughtful, deliberate, particular way, and to have the types of thoughts that we want to have that are going to make our nervous system cooperate with us. Our nervous system can be resistant or it can be cooperative. Calm practices make our nervous system cooperative, and then our thoughts are calm. And aggressive practices or aggressive thinkings make our nervous system non-cooperative. What does that mean? That our nervous system becomes protective of and perceives the environment as dangerous, and it becomes closed off, and it becomes every man for himself, every woman for himself, every person for themselves, against the world. That's non-cooperative, and it leads to problems down the road. So what we want to do is the opposite. Calm practices, strengthening practices, balancing practices, purifying practices, and harmonizing practices. And then the thoughts and the nervous system are always in alignment, or you know at least how to bring them into alignment. It's a great question, and a really fascinating topic. What time do we need to wrap up, Sophia, by the way?
Whenever it's you want to answer all the questions, that's up to you. It's
I have time. It's,
okay. Great.
It's the full moon in Sagittarius, apparently. Am I planning any European workshops in the near future? Anna, I am not. I'm planning on staying in the temple here for the next year or so and building the temple back up. It just reopened and the yoga classes in here. I hope to go to India in December to visit S. Vyasa and my professors there. And Radhanath Swami, I believe, is doing the yoga festival at the Govardhan Eco Village, which, if he does it, I will be attending and teaching at. And Europe, maybe again, end of 2023 or something like that. But I'm going to focus here for the time being. But I'm online every day, like teaching donation-based classes, so you can please attend any of those. Anjan, you are welcome. And Vishaka, I answered that one. Let's see. Satya, yes, that is the question. That is the book, Yoga Philosophy of Patanjali. Okay, Pranjali. Okay, this will be the last question. We saw the others. What does basically identification with doership mean when we choose our actions or reactions for karma? Well, I think that there's an important idea within the Buddhist traditions, and that is of right action. So if we're going to be performing actions and we're identified with those actions anyway, I'm going to identify honestly with every action that I do today. I'm identifying with the action right now of being a speaker. I want to be a good speaker. I'd like to say the right things. I'm speaking to largely Indian audience. I'm not Indian. I'm speaking to you about your traditions. That makes me very uncomfortable, if the truth be told. I'm not comfortable speaking to Indians about their own tradition or culture. You already know all of these things a lot better than I do. Yet somehow here I am, and I perhaps stupidly said yes to something where I should just keep my mouth shut and speak to Westerners about these things. Anyway, here I am. So I am identifying with this action and with these thoughts that I have. Everything else I do today, I'm going to identify with, because there are things I need to accomplish: getting my emails answered, having lunch with my wife and my daughter that we're going to have today, all these things. Now, okay, so fine. If I just accept the fact that I think I'm the doer of all the things that I'm doing, then what kind of actions can I perform that are a positive type of doership? Meaning, a doership where I don't think that I have to be better, more powerful, more superior, smarter, better looking, anything than everyone else on the planet. What kind of actions can I perform where, and how can I perform actions so that I feel connected to people? I feel connected to the world around me. That I feel that here in the temple and in our yoga classes, we have a sense of either belonging or sharing or common growth. How can I do actions in a way where there is this common sense of growth and of, all moving forward together, justice, whatever the words might be that we want to use in our trying times? What are those actions going to be? So what we do is we choose our actions carefully. And not all of them are going to be chosen well, and not all of them are going to be good. but we try to choose the best course of action we can, do the things that are for the common good, and also for our own good as well, but things that don't hurt other people. And then what happens is our consciousness begins to shift. And so we can't just say, I'm not the doer, I'm not the doer, I'm not the doer, and then go, I'm really hungry, I'm going to go eat big chocolate ice cream. Because then obviously we are the doer, and all the saying of I'm not the doer has been a fallacy. So like, we don't want to say fake things, but what we want to do is begin to transform our consciousness so that we perceive and interpret the world around us in a way which is closer in alignment with reality. And Patanjali says in Yoga Sutra that at these certain levels of samadhi, then ritam tatra prajna, then ritam, the universal harmony, the cosmic order, reflects itself through our field of intelligence. But that's a transformation of consciousness that we have to move towards. At that point, we are in harmony with the universe and we are truly not the doer. But until that point, we're going to be doing a whole lot of stuff. But Patanjali and Lord Krishna in the Gita and in many of the other texts, they give us the pathway by which we can follow the right action so that eventually Ritam will reflect through us and we become that rather than the doer of individual deeds. So we follow the practices, we follow the pathways that have been set out in these time-tested texts. We transform our consciousness and eventually things bear fruit the way they're supposed to. So briefly, that's how I would answer your question, Patanjali. I hope that was sensible, made sense, and was useful for you. And Karen, I'd love to come to Ireland, maybe in 2024. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the questions answered. So lucky participants, we don't always get to do that. So thank you so much for your time and for staying with us. We've already shared his details with everyone. I've put it on the chat for everyone, his Instagram handle as well as the website, if anyone would like to get in touch. Before we sign out of this session, I just have a few quick announcements for all our participants. Indica Yoga is announcing its first 10-day Yoga Foundation course at Ratambara Retreat. This is a residential course. We also have another 2-day residential course, which will be conducted by the director of the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, Nritya Jagannathan, called Mindful Living. Next week's Yoga Insights talk is about plant-based food and lifestyle for wellness, which will be conducted by Dr. Sirisha Pot-Luri. So I hope everyone joins. And we're very excited to announce our Global Festival of Yoga for this year. We're going to be doing 3 lectures on the life and works of Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda, and Ramana Maharshi. So Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi. And we're also we've launched Indica Yoga Veda Studies Chanting Teachers Training Program, which is going to be led by Shantala Sri Ramaya. So please join that for everyone. We've heard so many good things about chanting today. So that's a great course for teachers. And for any questions and further information, please write to us at namaste@indica.org.in. And all of these courses you can find and register for on our website. So I think, there's also broomstreetganesha.org, the website for the beautiful temple we're seeing in the background where Eddie's sitting. Thank you so much. So yes, thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and a big thank you, so much gratitude for you, Eddie Stern. Thank you so much for joining us and always being a part of Indica Yoga's events. We love you and we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And folks, please do check out the Broom Street Ganesh website. That's really, the temple is what we do here, and yoga classes occur in the temple, but that's really like the primary thing that we're doing. So we'd love for you to attend our online programs or support the temple however you'd like to. And I will also be taking the Veda teacher training course with Shantala, if she lets me.
Oh, wonderful. That is so great. Thank you everyone for joining. And also this beautiful talk is going to be available on the Indica Yoga website as well as our YouTube channel. So you can always come back to it because it's just so wonderfully calming, and who doesn't like to feel that way? So thank you everyone. Have a beautiful evening. Anyone joining us from the States, have a beautiful day. Thank you. Dhanyavad. Om.
Peace. Om.